Please subscribe and hit the like button.
Well, we're going to need to be strong. That is for darn sure. It is a crazy world that we're in today. Who could have predicted that the world would have fallen apart as dramatically as it has? I am Yada. This is Yada Yahweh Radio. We're here also with Kirk. We may have JB joining us later. Kirk, of course, we're in different sides of the world. I'm here in paradise of sort. Of course, the reason this paradise has nothing to do with anything man has done. The government here is astonishingly corrupt. Crime is high. The roads are pitted, and the utilities don't work. It is just such a stunningly beautiful island, and the sea is so alluring, and the sky and the weather, all the things that man has nothing to do with. You just wake up and you look out, and the early rays this morning, I got up at a little after 5 and came in and started translating and writing, and to watch the first long rays of light over the palm trees and the ocean. It turns all those beautiful shades of blue, and the sky is magenta, and then we had dinner with friends on the boat tonight, and it really is just a lovely place. You're coming in, and here it's now 8:30 in the evening. The temperature is probably 75 degrees with a light breeze. High today was 82. Again, a light breeze. It rains for 15 to 20 minutes every day, just enough to keep everything green, fresh, clean. So it's a lovely place. You're there in California. It's now cold.
Very cold.
You can't even walk into a supermarket without standing in a line, which you're guaranteed to get COVID in the line, and it's been turned back into the California penal colony. Yeah. The warden is called governor, but it's penal colony. You are assigned to house arrest. They don't even give you 3 square meals in this penal colony. No. They don't do your laundry. No. They don't give you 3 square meals. I'm not even sure they want to send you outside for exercise time.
No,
not that you're in a position where you could capitalize, like that, but I don't even think there's a conjugal visit considered anymore. That would be considered way too risky, comrade.
Oh God! Yahweh help me! Yahweh help me!
Yeah, I have been, Kirk. I told you I couldn't resist at least hinting at it. We'll get to it in future programs, but I've now translated, really for the first time, thoughtfully, the 3 conversations that and episodes in Abraham's life that are exceedingly seedy. They're just appalling. Now, the first is where he lies about his relationship with his wife to Pharaoh, and she's taken and essentially becomes a concubine of Pharaoh. Sarah does, and Abraham plays it for a fortune. I mean, he's given vast herds of sheep and cattle and camels, and plied with massive amounts of gold and silver. And if that weren't bad enough, and that's really bad, he did it again with Abimelech. He did it right after Sodom, the fall of Sodom. And between the two, he has that negotiation with Yahweh that's, they said, okay, if there's 50 people, well, if there's 45, and it goes on down. Mm-hmm. That had nothing to do with Sodom. It had all to do with Abraham. And his tone with Yahweh was reprehensible. What he said to Yahweh was reprehensible. And then that's followed with a episode with Abimelech that was worse than the experience with Pharaoh, where he pimped out his wife, lied to enrich himself, and we made a commitment a long time ago. We're going to go where the words lead. It's just there's a reason that Yahweh told us both stories, intimate details about both stories. Reason. And I've come to the conclusion, and we'll get into the details of this. They'll make your toes curl. Yesterday in the evening, about 9:30, I finally stopped translating. I was so disgusted and so mad. I hardly could sleep last night. Why Yahweh would have to endure someone as disgusting as Abraham. And it finally dawned on me. I think it was Leah more than anyone else that said, you just don't get it. Abraham is Israel. He is exactly like Israel, the best and the worst of Israel. And, of course, there's a lot more worst than there is best. And so it's Yahweh saying, if this idiot can become right with me, even Israel can. It's like Dode. If this guy with all of these flaws, all of these family problems, all of these issues, if he can be my son, so can you. It's like the situation with Moshe, the reluctant liberator. I don't want to go. No, find somebody else. I'm not going back there. And besides all that, I'm stutter. So, no, we're not doing this. And who did Yahweh have that introduced his name and his guidance to the world? Him.
Of course, Moshe.
Yeah, so it says one of two things. Either we as humans are so rotten that these guys are the best that Yahweh can find. The best of us are horrible. That's one option. The other option is that God wants to work through weakness to show his strength, so that there is no one that could rationally present a case that, well, Moses wrote the Torah, or that Moses was the great liberator, or that Moses was the great prophet, or that David was this great king and this great warrior and great songwriter and singer, or that Abraham was God's friend. It was through his upright character that God chose him for the covenant. No. It was in spite of them. It wasn't because of them. And that's a powerful lesson. It means a whole lot of things, of course. It means that if you were chosen to work with Yahweh, you ought not brag about it. It's just let's start there. And second, if you're worried that, well, you might have done stuff that you shouldn't have done,
chill.
Just chill. Take a chill pill. You're going to be fine. It's God's not really expecting a whole lot from us.
Apparently not.
Yeah. Kirk, there's room in the covenant for you and me, man.
Well, that's very comforting.
Yeah.
Albeit funny.
Yes, that's yep. I was writing because I think about you as a golfer, and one time, I was a golfer too. I play. I'm just not very good anymore. And I said, if the first thing that I would do because I wrote this whole 2 soaring paragraphs So I said, okay, now, after we finished Abraham's diatribe, where his moral equivalency, and he's just tongue-lashing. It's just terrible. And I said, rather than all of that rubbish, wouldn't you have liked to have Abraham ask, and I just got a whole lot of questions. One of the questions then is, I don't know if you ever played golf before, but if you have, then would you mind giving me a mulligan on my time before Pharaoh? All right, so we were talking about how the story of Hosea was an important reference point for a discussion about Adam in the garden and the whole concept of knowledge and what it is that it can do for us and what we ought to learn and where we should seek understanding. And we were in Hosea 4:6 at the end of the program. And I'm going to read it and then let you, Kirk, you've done a study on it, and share a little bit about it. Yeah. And, to my thinking, Hosea 4, in fact, really most of Hosea, from beginning to end, is in the top 4 or 5 favorite books for me. Of course, I love Bereshith. It's so raw. It's so real. So Bereshith is a favorite book. Of course, it's impossible not to love Torah, which is called Leviticus, because what God presents in it, and the stories of the Exodus and Shabbat are marvelous. And I'm personally I have a romance with Dode. It's no mistake about it. I just think he's such a brilliant mind and such a wonderful orator. I love words, and he is better at them than anyone that I have ever read. And we've come to really appreciate the starkiness of Yirmiyahu, and the unloved prophet. My view, the greatest of the prophets, Yahshua. And so among those, I'd say I'd put Hosea and my top group. Just God speaks so clearly through him. So here's Hosea 4:6. It reads as follows: Indeed, because you have avoided and rejected, Atama'as, you have limited your association with and diminished the importance of. You have spurned and shown an aversion to. You have refused to accept, disdained, and sometimes despised, even loathed, call perfect, literally, during your finite time. This knowledge, which leads to understanding, hadayat, the acquisition of valid information, being perceptive, rational, reasonable. So, I will also reject you from approaching me or serving as my priest. It's really interesting up to that point, Kirk, is it says, if you reject knowledge, then Yahweh will reject you, which means that what God is saying here is that he and knowledge, he and understanding can be equivalent. Yeah, they're synonymous. Because this is, you reject me, I reject you. But he doesn't say because you have rejected me. He says because you have rejected knowledge, which leads to understanding. So God is equating himself with knowledge, which means the way to know God is through the acquisition of valid information, being perceptive, rational, and reasonable. It is the antithesis of faith.
Absolutely. Hey,
because go ahead.
No, I was just saying. No, go ahead. I'll talk in a minute.
Okay. Then, and since you have overlooked and forgotten the Torah, the guidance of your God, I will overlook and cease to care about your children also. So now what we have is knowledge that leads to understanding being equated with Yahweh, but also with the Torah. And we have the Torah being equated to God's offspring. Because he says, if you forget the Torah, I will cease to care about your offspring too. So the Torah is being equated to Yahweh's seed, his offspring. And it's being equated to the source of knowledge, which is being equated to Yahweh. A really powerful statement when you think of the equivalencies and the way that it is worded. Indeed, because you have avoided and rejected this knowledge which leads to understanding, I will also avoid and reject you from approaching me or serving as priests. And since you have overlooked and forgotten the Torah guidance of your God, I will overlook and cease to care about your children also. I would ask you, Bert, is there a religion anywhere in the world where the Torah is paramount to that religion?
Not at all.
Not even close.
No.
Jews, Hadithic Jews, Orthodox Jews, will claim that they are Torah observant, and that's absolute bullcrap. They're Talmud observant. They dress the Torah up like it's a whore. They put it in this little pretty dress. They put a crown on it. They kiss it and fondle all over it, and then they study their Talmud. The Talmud is nothing but rabbinical arguments. It's man's ego. No, there is Christianity. Paul despised the Torah. The entire concept of Christianity is to avoid the Torah at all costs. Islam says that the Quran confirms the Torah when it's the antithesis of it. No. There isn't a single religion in the world that is Torah observant. Not one. And therefore, since there isn't one religion that is Torah observant, God has overlooked and forgotten the children of the world. And that is our single most important role as parents and as people. Sharing the Torah. You know, I've had to contemplate God's assessment of Abraham's complaint. You know, there's 45 and 40 and 30 and 20 and 10 people in Sodom where you spread the place. God's already, he begins the conversation by, should we tell Abraham what I have decided to do to Sodom? Decision's already made. And so Abraham is counting down, well, how bad does bad have to be before you give up? In other words, he's really talking about himself. If there's 1% good in me, is there any hope for me? Anyway, the reality is, you know how many righteous people there were in Sodom?
0.
Lot was a scallywag. So was his daughters and his wife. There were 0.
Oh, yeah.
The answer is 0. Yahweh likely would have spared Sodom had there been one person who was part of the covenant and who was willing to stand up and speak on behalf of Yahweh and his covenant. One. Because if there was one, there was hope for 2. Because if there's one, you want that person, God wants that person to be able to share his message. But there was none. But it's not alone with Sodom. In the entire world, you know how many people were covenant members who shared Yahweh's name and testimony effectively at the time of Abraham and Sarah?
Well, he didn't know his name, so
that's
the 0 again.
The answer is 0. Yeah. I mean, Abraham would finally get it together, and that's the reason there had to be a test on Mount Moriah with Abraham, because this guy had been so foul. There had to be a moment where he demonstrated that he actually understood and was willing to make a commitment to the covenant.
Mm-hmm.
But the answer was 0. And I'm here to tell you that for the past 2,000 years, for most of that time, there have been, most of that time, Kirk, there's been 0.
Yeah. They're just little snippets every now and then. Yosha shows up, of course. But, there's nothing.
Most of the time,
I've been thinking about that all
answer
week.
is 0. Yeah. It's God is stunningly unpopular. He is the creator of the universe, the greatest mind the universe will ever know, the most merciful, charitable, fun, brilliant, articulate individual who has created the ultimate experience for us. You think that a theme park, Disney World, or Universal Studios, wow,
that's entertaining, hardly.
Or even, the mythical Jurassic Park would be entertaining, or Interstellar, or any of that. No, God, what He's offering is an entire universe and the ability to go anywhere at any time with Him or without Him and enjoy life and explore. And He is stunningly unpopular. So, here we are. God is saying that because you have avoided and rejected this knowledge which leads to understanding, I am also going to reject you. And you are not going to approach me or serve with me as priests. And since you have overlooked and forgotten the Torah guidance of your God, I will overlook and cease to care about your children also. Now, this was not a perpetual condemnation. No, God through the same prophet, in the same prophecy says, there's going to be a couple of thousand years of this. And in the third day, we are going to get it together. And there will be the shining moment of Abraham headed to Moriah is the one time that he was a stand-up guy and accountable. Israel is going to be that. Jews. A number of them in the very end. So what did you find as you analyzed?
Well, let me say a couple of things just as you've been talking, and I've been thinking a lot this past week about these issues. And by the way, all the forgotten parts and to forget are all written in the imperfect. So we know that's an ongoing thing. It doesn't have to be. It's not a one and done and it's over with. So we're safe on that analysis. But here are the things that have been hitting me rather hard in the things that you've been translating not only lately, but just a little bit. Just to be a little bit careful though. Because you have rejected knowledge, the rejected is perfect, which means that there has been a time that this occurred. It happened to be a very long time, but that time is now over. Yes. So it's yes. So that time is now over. That was an example of a statement that was written in the perfect. But since you have overlooked and forgotten the Torah, that was written in the imperfect. Unfortunately. Gotcha. So God's saying that's become habitual among Jews. Well, I'm happy about what we've been discussing, only because it explains a lot of things. Before I get to my one little analysis thing, a part of that verse, which is my favorite part, is beyond any doubt in my mind now that people are just basically rotten. And I don't mean everybody is horrible. I mean, some people are polite and nice and so forth. But this God views it. You're either on his side or your to our own devices, we're just terrible. The world is just screwed. I mean, it's and the people in it are just not worth it. I mean, look at history. I mean, it just blows it away.
And that's particularly true with societal man, cultural man, political man, religious man. That man within institutions, man nationalized, is horrible.
They become
and
worse than
always
you can't imagine.
all of the time. Yeah, always bad all of the time. Individual men and women have moments of good and bad. Mm-hmm. There are very little in individual men and women of right. But there are moments of good and bad. When it comes to civilizations and countries and institutions, it's almost all bad and always wrong.
Well, they obviously feed on themselves. Once you get a bunch of people together, it just grows, and it's exponential. I mean, it just so. And then beyond a shadow of a doubt, everything I read, the Torah is the only answer. It is absolutely the only answer. There's no ands, ifs, or buts about it. There's no sideway, doorway, nothing. So we're totally all on the correct path in that regard. And the only place you can find the answers is in the Torah. And you said this, I repeated it, and as James and everyone else is over and over and over again. So I took one of my favorite verses, this part of this verse, this Hosea 4:6. And your translation was, and since you have overlooked and forgotten the Torah, and it's a very big deal on the Torah because in the English one they're going to say law, of your God, Elohim, I will overlook and cease to care about your children also. So here's the commentary and what I did that I wrote last night, and I said all he asked us to do was to shamar the Torah. He said, examine his teachings, his guidance, and his instructional tool. And, of course, you must remember that it does exist, and it is complete. That's something that we learn in it, where he says, everything is completed here. Now, once you understand it is complete, then you don't need anything else. So there is no room for a New Testament. There's no room for, we can make commentary like Dabarim, but we're not changing any facts. We're not changing a single fact. So after all, it was all that was needed to educate and inspire. What I was trying to say. After all, the only thing that was necessary to inspire the greatest individual that we know, even though he has many, many faults, is Dov, and that was the Torah. That's all he had. Right. So we obviously, if you can produce a Dov from that, we are in even better hands because we have so much stuff to go by. So the example has to be carefully examine, consider the words on an ongoing basis. Right. So what I started with, I said, okay, I said to myself, okay, let's do one. Let's shamar Torah, but instead of Torah, I just used the word Torah. So here's what I did. I wrote the letters down. You have the Tal and the Wa and the Rosh and the Hey. Now let's examine that for a second. We'll do our little close examination. The Tal represents the upright pole. It supports the tin of the witness, which houses the written documents and the tablets of stone. It marks a spot. X marks the spot, if you like, where one can find all the answers. It is a doorway. It is an ensign. It is a pole and a banner to show the way. Zion, pronounced often written with a Z, Zion, the signpost along the way. The next letter in there is a Wa. The Wa represents an enlargement tool for increasing the family and the family home. It secures and aids in protecting those that dwell there. That can be metaphorical or whether it can be realistic, whether it's a tent or whether it's just increasing the family as a metaphor. The next letter is a Rosh, or Resh originally. But the Rosh represents a person observing this very document. I think that's terribly interesting to me that he put that in there. Ones who do are considered the best, the top, the first, and that's the ones that Yahweh is seeking his family. I'll take a little aside here, I always liked what you said about Dode when you said the one thing he was not good man. He was right.
No.
Everything that y'all wanted done, understood, he did correctly. He
wasn't right about everything. He made some really bad choices. But when it came to God, he was always right.
Always correct.
Yeah. Right about the Torah, right about the Mikra, right about the covenant.
Yeah, and insisted that they celebrate him, throughout his reign. The last letter is a 4-letter word. The last one is a hey. And the hey is the response required for admission to the family. It depicts one who's engaged in the walk along the pathway known as the Moed Mikra. They're always observant, they're engaged, and they are reaching up and beholding greatness. And then I mentioned that as a little aside, I said if one looks carefully at this word, one will find light, or is in the middle. Not only are we enlightened, but where light is, there is no darkness. We become beings of light and thus are freed, unencumbered to pursue life to the fullest. It's hard to think about us being as rotten as we are. It's hard to think about Abraham as being as rotten as he was. Or I was kind of shaken about Lot, to be honest with you, Lot. When we did that study, I was like, my gosh, these people are, boy, they act on everything. Everything rotten that comes to their mind, they act on. So, but all he did, all Yahweh asked you to do, he says, and this is the tragedy of it all he asked you to do was Shamar Torah. And all he asked the children, the ones who are his leaders, his priest, his Loi, was to help us study the Torah better. And they squandered an opportunity that quite frankly was the most marvelous thing in the world. And they squandered that opportunity, and actually it fell to you by default. Thank you again too. But this has been. I know you picked it up and ran with it, pal. You get credit for that beyond words. I mean, that's. But this is. That's not hard. I'm not a writer, but I do enjoy words, and I do look at this stuff, and I don't use all the tools that you and JB. I mean, y'all know more about computers than I can deal with, and y'all are both excellent writers. But I can analyze this stuff and figure out. That's exactly what it means, and I can go through a Masoretic text and I can analyze that and say that's wrong and this is why, and defend my position on it extremely well. And I can look at it and say this is what it should be reading, and here's the evidence for it on the same material that they have access to. So this is not. I'm still stunned. That sometimes when I think about how bad it's going to get, but Yah has every right to do so. I mean, I can't go to him and say, "Well, why are you wiping these out?" It's a lot like the story you just mentioned a minute ago about where Lot was.
Wouldn't it be so much better for Abraham rather than say we spare the place for 10 people who are righteous? Wouldn't it have been so much better for Abraham to say, obviously, you created the universe, you're the author of life. There's a reason that you have come to recognize that we are better off without Sodom than with it. That by destroying Sodom, there is a net gain that is important. And so could you explain to me your rationale
why it's necessary
for destroying Sodom, and wouldn't that have been a marvelous discussion where Yahweh says, they have created an environment where they have made merchandise out of people, where they have no respect for anyone but only their things, and they have created so many misconceptions now and have treated people so poorly that this has become a plague. And it is so intoxicating that there is not only no one that knows the truth there. There is no one that has any interest of ever knowing the truth. There will never be a person in that community that speaks for me, speaks on behalf of the covenant. And so as it grows, as it festers, as it metastasizes, right next to the promised land, right next to Israel, it will infect it. And therefore it's like saying, there's a bunch of countries with Ebola. The smartest thing we can do is let's bring those people that have Ebola into the rest of our country. And so
we did.
That's really stupid is what God is saying. That is really stupid. It's like us saying, we've got this pandemic going of COVID-19, which, by the way, means crown. We've got this virus going called COVID, the crown, and what we think we ought to do is if anybody is shown to have it, we're going to put them in our hospitals so that our healthcare workers, our doctors and our nurses are exposed to it, so they get sick and die. And so that the hospitals that have really sick people who are already on the edge of death, they're in the hospital because they're trying to stay alive, we will infect those people too. So they're going to die. And rather than saying what God did is, when you have a pandemic, remove the people from the community. Take them out. Isolate them. And in your community, start wearing masks. It's so allowing Sodom to continue to fester is like bringing sick people who are contagious into a hospital.
Mm-hmm.
There would have been no chance for Israel. None. And wouldn't it have been great, though, if Abraham had said, let's have a discussion as what the thought process is here so that I understand it. It's like a father buying a home for his family, finding out that home has rats that live in the basement, and those rats have fleas, and those fleas are infected with the plague.
Goodbye.
And saying to his family, live and let live. Don't worry about it. Going in. Or we're going to move into a cave and it's filled with pit vipers. Not a problem. Or are you going to be responsible and you're going to annihilate those rats and remove the pit vipers so that your family is safe?
Well, if you'd followed Yah's instruction, he will do the annihilating. Obviously, Hezekiah figured that out.
Yes.
It's not like you have to go out and conquer them. Yahweh took care of it, didn't he?
Yes,
always
he did.
does.
He does. And he's going to take care of it in the end. I mean, we're worse today than Sodom was then, and Yahweh's going to take care of it again. So that the earth becomes a place that we've enjoyed living for 1,000 years. He's going to remove them all.
I read. I'm sorry. No, I just read an old, long time ago. I dug some stuff off of my closet because I'm trying to clean out some of the closets a little bit, and I read some old stuff that you had written a long time ago, probably with Ken, about America. There, where we were talking about we're talking about three different things that can wipe them out.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, one of them is Apophis. If it hits, it will pass by, and it's a pretty good chance I think it's going to hit. But even if you didn't have that one, y'all went into a great deal of detail about the Canary Islands collapsing and that is humongous.
Tidal wave.
And y'all talked a little bit. Yeah, then y'all also talked about potential nuclear situation that may cause that to happen, or even nuclear situation. So this between
Russia, China, Europe, and the United States, how there will be, in all likelihood, something that ignites a nuclear exchange between the countries, and whether it's a rogue nation like Iran or North Korea that sets it off, and you have an unstable president or leader of one of those countries that chooses to misconstrue what happens or wants to save face, that responds, and then and each country chimes in, and pretty soon you have a nuclear winter. You've obliterated a third of the earth, making it uninhabitable. Yeah. And from Yahweh's perspective, if you were to eliminate North America, he's called his people out of here. And you were to eliminate Europe, he's called his people out of there. And you were to eliminate Russia, his people have long left Russia because it was so incredibly anti-Semitic. Then Israel is the only safe home. There's a reason God is saying, leave these places and come back home. And with Israel, he's not kidding. This is not a hypothetical. This is not a symbolic presentation.
Gesture of some kind.
You're a Yehudim, a Jew. You need to go back to Israel.
You need to leave.
Yeah, you need to leave. And I know that's tough because Israel's a tough place to live. It's expensive. It's small. They're gunning for you. A lot of Islamic terrorism. The world despises Israel. But you need to leave. That is with the exception of the religious. The religious could stay wherever you are. I don't really give a hoot. God doesn't care either. Don't go in and pollute the place.
Or, Craig, you could start studying the Torah, accept the terms and conditions, and start walking down the path, and you get an early trip home.
This is true. So this statement in Hosea 4:6 is unequivocal, and it's devastating. The chosen people, Yahowah and Israel, no longer speak for God. The time apart would be limited, but long, lasting 2,500 years. And they would have no one to blame but themselves. It was a self-inflicted injury, debilitating and destructive. Now, that's not to say that they would be replaced, only avoided and forgotten. Very important. They have not been replaced. There is no hint of, I am going to replace them. Avoided and forgotten. There's no room here for the imposition of Christianity, Islam, or socialist secular humanism. It was the people's disdain for the Torah and their limited association with Yahweh's guidance, the failure to respond to his teachings, which led to this starry state of affairs. As a result, it is impossible for any religion, but especially those which replace the Torah with a Talmud, a New Testament, or a Quran, from being chosen to carry on.
Agreed.
It is impossible. It is impossible for any religion, but especially those who replace the Torah with a Talmud, a New Testament, or Quran, being chosen to represent God. Impossible.
They're all contradictions. How can you replace something with a contradiction?
Okay. The statement was really simple. Because you have forgotten my Torah, I have forgotten your children. All of those religions have obfuscated the Torah. And so as socialist secular humanism, the religious will protest the undeniable implications of this prophecy nonetheless, and claim that there is no way God's voice could have been silenced over the millennia. That is where they, too, have ostracized and disqualified themselves. Yahweh had already revealed his Torah. There was nothing more that needed to be conveyed. And because the chosen people elected to replace it with something else, the Talmud, the Mishnah, and the Zohar, that they became too ignorant and irrational to speak for Yahweh. You know, we are not prophets.
No.
We're not prophets.
Don't want to be.
Don't want to be a prophet, not a prophet. No need for a prophet. God has said more already than we could possibly translate and analyze and draw insights from. Yeah. It's already there. There is more there than there is time in the day, even if there were 1,000 of us doing this. 1,000 people getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning, sitting down in a chair before the text is saying, I want to render this in today's parlance, such that the world can have at least the opportunity to understand what God said and then share what these insights mean in a way that causes people to think and to understand. If there were 1,000 of us doing it, there isn't enough time left to explore even a fraction of it. So we don't need more. Yeah, I mean, I guess it's inappropriate to say we have too much. But from my perspective, we do. I love this. I do it every day. There is no way I'm going to finish Yahowah before time runs out. I'm not going to finish the Torah before time runs out in terms of translate. I'm not going to finish Malachi or Zechariah before time runs out. It's just not going to happen. Not enough time. You know, when I'm editing Yada Yahweh as I am now, and you know, I came really close to finishing volume 3, and now I'm nowhere close because I ran up into material that was just so interesting. I hadn't translated it previously, but because I probably didn't translate it because I didn't want to deal with it. I mean, talk about becoming unpopular. When you say that Abraham's a scallywag, and he is, you know, it's. Well, you said more than what I actually say about Abraham, I don't want to say on this program without actually reading to you what he said and did. And when you make the prejudicial statements based upon what he said and did, they're supported. There wouldn't be supportive if I were to say them now. But, you know, the fact of the matter is that Israel has disqualified itself. And there is no replacement. And it's been the case for better part of 2,500 years. God has given us all of the instruction we could possibly need. You could spend a lifetime translating and analyzing those songs, his songs. You could spend a lifetime analyzing just Barashit, just Shemoth, just Kara, just Devarim. Oh, you could spend multiple lifetimes analyzing Yahowah, Zechariah. Yeah, there's no need for more. God has given us all of the instruction and guidance we will ever need. He has also provided prophetic revelation, which speak to his creation, explaining what would occur with regard to his people as a consequence through the next 25 centuries. You know, there's so many people say, well, you know, God has to have a current revelation. The world has changed so much. What do you think the purpose of prophecy is? Why do you think the prophecies are there? What do you think he's talking about in those prophecies? What is the difference if God spoke through a prophet about what is happening today, 2,000 years ago, or he found somebody that could serve as a prophet right now? Other than he's a whole lot more credible
if he did it then.
If he did it 2,000 years ago or 2,500 years ago, then if he did it today, because if he did it today, how would that person validate their authenticity. But if it's a person that did it 2,500 years ago, and they're talking about things that are materializing before our very eyes, the authenticity has been validated.
Yeah, pretty incredible, huh?
Yeah. And that is where these translations and insights become valuable. Everything I'm sharing with you is derived by closely examining and carefully considering what was revealed under the inspiration of Yahweh through Yahudim and Yisrael before they were disenfranchised. Literally disenfranchised. Yeah. Unlike those who have slighted Yahweh's testimony, substituting it for their own, we have chosen to listen to God. We have come to realize and accept that the information He has provided leads to understanding. We value His Torah above everything except Yahweh Himself. And based upon this statement, there really is very little difference between Yahweh and His Torah.
Mm-hmm.
And because we care about Yahweh, we want what He wants, which is for His people to listen. The time has long passed for Jews to speak for God, but it is nigh for them to listen to God. As a Gentile, I know my place. I am not a prophet, nor are you, Kirk.
No.
I am Yada. I am Yada. I'm one who knows. I am Yah's choder. It's just a stem, but off the right branch. His Nakri, that's a foreigner, but an observant one, who in a distant land and time would call God's people home. We offer no qualifications other than a willingness to engage and go where His words lead. But even in our inadequacies, it does not matter. In fact, if it were not for our inadequacies, we wouldn't be engaged in this. In Yeshaya 11, Yahweh revealed that He would supply all that was needed to accomplish His intent of awakening His people. His message and His invitations are clear. Your response is all that matters now. There's but one way to God, and it was through His words that we make our way to Him. This journey takes place in our minds. We reach the desired destination by listening to Yahweh's testimony. Along the way, knowledge leads to understanding. Rabbis, however, mislead and are therefore a liability. This is Hosea 4:7. So then, as the rabbis became more numerous and influential, Rabab, they accordingly will become increasingly wrong, missing the way to me. That's powerful, isn't it? So then, as the rabbis become more numerous and influential, they accordingly will become increasingly wrong, missing the way, chata. They will bear blame for their errors in judgment and become guilty, forfeiting the way to me. Their manifestation of power and authority I will change into dishonor and ignominy, shame and disgrace. Hosea 4:7. No matter where we look, Yahweh's message is consistent. The first step toward establishing a relationship with God is to disassociate from those who claim to speak for Him. They're all wrong. Every religious cleric, rabbis foremost among them. Rabab is the word rabbis purloined from the text of the Torah and their quest for an exalted title. It's only fair that they be held accountable, because I can guarantee you they are not exalted before God. Choose to start walking halak, because we should choose of our own volition to return to Yahowah. What a simple statement.
Mm-hmm.
And this is obviously Hosea intervening at this point. He's just saying, come on, people. This is not forever. Choose to move towards Yahowah. Get up off your knees. Get up off the couch. Stop with your video games. Stop with your religious musings. Stop with your politics. Stop with your conspiracies. Let's move. Get up, get going. Because we should choose of our own volition to return. Shub. Let's decide to turn around, change our attitude and perspective, and be restored to Yahweh. What a grand idea. For indeed, he once picked us, then sent us away for a while, so that he could heal and restore us over time. He has chosen to disable us, and yet he will wrap himself around us and will bandage us. Hosea 6:1. There is a time where Yehudim and Yisrael are called to return to Yahweh. That time is now.
Case closed.
There was a time when Yehudim and Yisrael were picked to represent Yahweh and his Torah and his covenant. And now he is ready to restore Israel. Yes, he disabled his people because they disavowed his Torah, but he's going to wrap himself around his people, bandage them up, embrace them, heal them, reconcile his relationship with them. Any of the words there, Kirk, that you spent some time analyzing?
Well, my little computer just went down, but I had some. I was let's see if I can get to. I may have to pass.
Okay, well, we'll come back to it. But,
yeah,
there's some interesting words here. Naka, to restrict, incapacitate. And it sounds strange that God would restrict anyone, particularly from doing it. And yet that's what he had to do. We talked about it in our last program and previous to that God actually had to blind Yisrael and Yehudim. Because had he not done so, had they infused their religion with his Torah rather than their Talmud, had they infused their religion with Yahweh's name rather than Hashem, had they celebrated the Mikre as they were intended as opposed to creating their own holidays, had they done anything that God actually asked and sought to understood God's word as opposed to their religious edicts, well, then they would have mixed the truth with lies such that it would be exceedingly confusing and make it very difficult to say, well, if they said this, that was true, this part over here isn't it, and so here we're 90% true and 10% wrong. That 10% wrong is really important, and so here's the nuance. Makes it really difficult. And if you're saying, yeah, that Yahweh is God's name, but that ain't what he said, really makes it difficult. If instead you can say that Rabbinic Judaism is just full of shit, that they are wrong about everything. They're wrong about the Shabbat. They're wrong about the Mikre. They're wrong about the covenant. They're wrong about what it means to be Yahudim. They're wrong about Dod. They're wrong about Moshe. They're wrong about the Torah. They're wrong about everything. Everything. And it's just a much cleaner, more credible presentation to show it with that steep a divide. And, they're oppressive to their people. And so that's why God did it this way.
Let me talk something about the car. Basically, it means to smite or to slaughter. It can be kill. It can also be to deliver a blow. But it also, the root is the two-letter root is a nun kaf, which means to crush. And it was understood in ancient times to place seeds in the palm of the hand and crush it to make a powdery spice. So, I mean, you could probably say that addressing your issue of the more if you allow them to, they will absolutely destroy it. Everything is credible. But when I looked at the crush part, I'm thinking, he's going to put a lot of pressure on them as of now to turn them into a spice, if you would.
Yes.
So maybe that's too much symbolism for most people, but yeah. But it does have a positive and negative slant to it as well. So
Chabash, which means to wrap around and to bandage, to encourage restoration, to encourage healing. Now, the primary term for come in Hebrew is bow, strongly suggesting that Yahweh wanted us to read halak as to start walking, moving from one place to another. It's a journey through life, through words and time. This represents and warrants our attention because this is the way the covenant relationship was initiated with Abraham. He was not only asked to halak, keep walking away from his country, society, and his father's house, and thus from the religious and political influences of Babylon. Yahweh instructed Abraham to halak, walk to him, and become perfected. Yahweh wants us moving. The sun hadn't even come up this morning. It's a little after 5 o'clock. And yet, I got up and walked into my study. And Yahweh just likes it when we, particularly in the morning, we're so much more productive. Get up and get going. It's one of the things that Doe did so effectively. But he wants us on our feet. He wants us standing up, reaching up, willing to go on a journey. And even when the walking is in our head, we talk about walk away from your country. Mm-hmm. But it's not geography. It's philosophy. And so we do that walking in our head. The covenant clearly is a journey. It's one which begins when we walk away from the corrupting influences of mankind. It develops by walking along the path that Yahweh has provided to perfect us, beginning with the doorway of life known as Passover, Pesach. This path from the world of men to the realm of God progresses through the perfection of unyeasted bread, our adoption on firstborn children, the empowerment and enrichment of the promise of 7, through the trumpet announcements leading to the promise of the day of reconciliations. We're invited to walk to Yahweh along the path he provided, something he addresses in his next pronouncement. Yahweh is intent on restoring his relationship with Israel. We know this because the Torah separation was for a limited time, while the Rapha, healing and renewing, it was for all time. We learned about the Naka, imposition of disabilities, during our review of Yeshaya, Isaiah 29, and the prophecy prologue of Yada Yahweh. God realized that it would be best if he restricted and incapacitated his people with the impairment of blinding them such that they would not understand the prophet, so they wouldn't corrupt and twist them and misappropriate them. It was the thing that made Paul so stunningly devastating, is that you have read, and so he would misquote something out of the Torah, but I, Paul, say, it was all about taking something God said, misappropriating it, misquoting it, misapplying it,
and twisting it into the Pauline religion of Christianity. So God made certain that rabbinical Judaism would be that astute. The Talmud is a waste of time. I was trying to figure out why the rabbinic calendar is several hundred years off. Mm-hmm. And I assumed that maybe it was Maimonides somehow doing an assessment of the genealogy in the Torah, and because he had no respect for Dode, not figuring out that Dode is in the exact middle of the human experience, 3,000 years on either side, and that he wouldn't look at the Exodus from Eden as an important date, nor would he even validate the affirmation of the Torah. And 1968 BCE is an important date, or that was exactly 40 Yobel to Yosha's fulfillment on Pesach on the same mountain, because, of course, they despise everything that Yosha stands for, and don't look at the covenant with Abraham as being particularly meaningful to them, because they twisted it so many different ways. And so when you put it together, I had thought they just misconstrued some things, but no. Maimonides' equation had nothing to do with the Torah. He was just out there like on a psychological bent of some sort, like he had been taking drugs, and came up with his own special recipe. Not validated whatsoever in the Word of God. Jews to this day say, well, that must be it. And they pretend that this is the year that based on the Torah. No, it's based on Maimonides' stupidity. Yeah, it's hard to figure out how they can be that stupid. Now, this leads us to another profoundly important prophetic announcement. After multiple days, he will choose to revive us, restoring our lives.
Yeah.
Probably 2 days. It was Yomim, which is just days, so it's days plural. When Yomim is written, it's usually considered 2 days, but it's days plural. He will choose to revive us, restoring our lives. So within the third day, he will take a stand to reestablish us, and we will live in his presence upon his appearance. If you look at time running from Eden to Abraham, and Abraham to Yosha, with Dode in the middle, and then from Yosha to Yahweh's return, and that the major dates on that timeline are separated by 2,000 years, 40 Yobel.
2,000 years, yeah.
2,000 years, 40 Yobel. And that Dode is right there in the middle of it, exactly in the middle of it. And you recognize now that Hosea is speaking of, all right, within a couple of days, we are going to be revived. Well, the revision was accomplished within 2 days of Abraham and the formation of the covenant, and within those days from the time of Dode, that's when Yahweh fulfilled the first four mikra, Pesach, Matzah, Bakodim, and Shavuot. And the third day is when he is returning, when he's taking a stand to reestablish the relationship. It is when he will fulfill Yom Kippurim, the Day of Reconciliations. So we have a timeline. Within the third day, he will take a stand to reestablish us. And we shall live in his presence upon his appearance. So I would say, is Israel partly reestablished as a nation? Yeah.
Well, they've returned, yes. They have a country.
Is Israel reestablished even partly with Yahweh? No.
No.
Is Israel living in the presence of God? No. Is Israel...
No, he's watching, but they ain't.
Right.
No.
Has Yahweh reappeared to Israel?
No.
No. So this is saying within the third day, Wah ba ha yom shelishe, I will take a stand to reestablish us, kum anahu. And we shall live in his presence upon his appearance. That is going to happen, ladies and gentlemen, Yom Kippurim, October of 2033. 13 years from now is when Yahweh is going to reappear, and it's when he is going to give those Yehudim, the Israelites who chose to avail themselves of his call home and his plan and his covenant and his Moed Mikre and his prophets and his Torah. He's going to give that remnant of his people the opportunity to live with him at his appearance. It is 13 years from now. Now, that said, you would be unwise for two reasons to wait until then. The first of those reasons is that life with Yahweh and the covenant is vastly superior to life without Yahweh. So why postpone what is so spectacular? It's not like, should I go and eat a bowl of ice cream, knowing that once I've eaten it, it's not there to eat anymore, or should I postpone my gratification and have it tomorrow so I can look forward to it? That's not the case. You have an unlimited amount of time and unlimited resources and power in your relationship with Yahweh. They do not deteriorate. They do not click down. The more you engage in the covenant, the more you have available to you. So,
walk now.
I can tell you that our lives are fulfilled. Our lives are abundant. Our lives are enriched. We are enlightened. We are liberated. We are empowered because of Yahweh's covenant relationship, and life in the covenant is vastly superior. The life of anyone. No matter how much money, no matter how much power, no matter how many toys, no matter where they are or who they are with, life in the covenant is better.
That's 100% true.
Yeah. So I would just go ahead and make that choice. It's good. Now, the other reason is the vast preponderance of people aren't going to survive between now and 2030.
The other side. Yeah, the other side is going.
Once you're dead, it is too late.
Yes.
And the longer you go without listening to Yahweh, without observing his Torah, without responding to him, the more entrenched you become and the harder it ultimately is to do so. So through his prophet Hosea, Yahweh told us that religion is anathema to him, and that it is the reason his people no longer know him. This has occurred because they have rejected his Torah, preferring their guidance above his. God has issued an essential warning, telling us that mankind, as a result of Paul, Akiba, and Muhammad, Maimonides as well, would effectively execute our own children, sacrificing them to human religious schemes. Then, in spite of our ignorance and our infidelity, speaking of Abraham, Yahweh promised to do what was required to heal the rift
that had arisen between he and his people, curing and restoring those willing to change their thinking, those willing to turn away from religion so that they could return to him. Well, one aspect of this promise was fulfilled by Yahusha in 33 CE, 700 years after Hosea scribed these prophetic words on a parchment scroll. The Jews have yet to capitalize. Well, individually, yes, some, but not collectively, upon the sacrifice of the Passover lamb. That's the worst part of Christianity and Judaism, and the fact that Christians were so wrong about their Jesus. No one was lived by that name. There was no Christ. There was no Jesus. He did not start a religion. He did not choose Paul. His testimony is not found in the Christian New Testament. He was Torah observant. And because of this menacing religion to God's people, they rejected Yahusha, his real name, completely. And that's very sad because Yahusha is the Passover lamb. He is the Pesach El. And there is no life without the doorway that his sacrifice provided.
Yeah.
And so there isn't any Christian or any Jew that has any religious affinity that understands the role that Yahusha actually played in opening that doorway. Well, one aspect of this promise was fulfilled by Yahusha, as I say, in 33 CE, 700 years after Yahusha scribed these words. It would be even longer in the course of 2 days that Yahusha, by fulfilling, or Yahweh, by fulfilling Passover and unyeasted bread, facilitated the means of restoration and eternal life, so that on the third day, represented by, well, the Moed Mikre, firstborn children, Yisrael and Yehudah could stand with God, adopted into his family. But as we know, most people, especially the adherents of Judaism, Christianity, Islam, socialist, secular humanism, remain oblivious to what Yahweh accomplished for his people during these 3 days. In particular, the lives of those who comprise Yisrael would not be renewed until Yahweh's return on the day of reconciliations. And that would not occur until the third day, or within 3,000 years of this writing in 700 BCE. Now, the final fulfillment of this prophecy was not in the year 4000 Yah, 33 CE, but will instead be in the year 6000 Yah, which is 2033. It is only then that Israel will be Chaya, restored to life, upon Yahweh's arrival. And so it is then that on this next day, 1,000 years, that Israel was able to stand with and be established by God during this millennial celebration of the Shabbat, Sukkah. Hosea 6:1 and 2 declares that 2 days after God heals mankind, or 2,000 years from 33 CE, he would restore those Yehudim willing to change their attitude towards him. This reconciliation will occur as promised on Yom Kippurim, the day of reconciliations in 2033, year 6000 Yah. And as a result, at the beginning of the third day after repairing us, and as a result of what he has done, we will be able to live forever in his presence at his appearance. God is predicting the 1,000-year celebration of Sukkah, which will commence on the called out celebration of Sukkah shelters in 2033, 5 days after his return. Collectively, then, these insights are among the most important, I think, in the Torah relative to our salvation. It sets up the timeline for our redemption. It even sets up the means to our redemption, the Torah. Yahweh has told us when he's going to return to, and actually return us to the Gan Eden, totally satisfying shelter which is conducive to life. He's told us when this is going to occur because he wants us to be enlightened so that we can be granted admission. So it's quite a prophecy in Hosea. I'll just share it kind of more quickly here, beginning where we began on Hosea 2:2 and through the end. It says, Quarrel and contend against your mother, because she is not a woman of mine, and I am not an individual of hers. Speaking of Israel. Let her choose to turn away from her continual whoring through her illicit relationships with false deities within her presence, as well as her marks of unfaithfulness from between her breasts. And therefore, I will have no concern or compassion for her children, because they are the children of whores, prostituting themselves through illicit relationships with false gods. For surely their mother was unfaithful and wantonly committed religious adultery. Do you know when Yahweh spoke to King Abimelech, my father was king, is what his name means, about Sarah, and he says, listen, you haven't touched her yet, so I'm going to spare your life. But let me tell you that what he may have said, she's my sister. She is Baal. Baal. Isn't that amazing? She is Baal. She's married to a Lord. She's married to a man who seeks to possess her. He's married to a man that controls her. Yeah, she's Baal. She was, as I say, Abraham represents Israel. You read these words, well, you see Abraham smeared all over them. And therefore I will have no concern or compassion for her children, because they are the children of whores, prostituting themselves with illicit relationships with false gods. Yeah, Sarah was treated like a prostitute, and her pimp was her husband, Abraham. For surely, their mother was unfaithful and wantonly committed religious adultery. I don't know, actually. I haven't ascertained that at this point, whether or not Sarah went along with the program. I think she went along with the program. I think that she didn't mind being one of Pharaoh's concubines, and I think she told both Pharaoh and Abimelech that she was just Abraham's sister. I think that the way they were treated and the way that they were enriched, that she was part of the scheme. I think it was Bonnie and Clyde.
Wow.
But it doesn't change that what
No.
You can be a pimp and have a prostitute that is likes being a prostitute and chooses you as their pimp, and collectively likes the fact that the two of you as a team are enriched by this illicit act. And I'm not to the point where I'm going to say that Sarah was totally complicit, but there seems to be some complicity. So it wasn't Sarah trying to get out. I think she was manipulated, yes. I think she was controlled. But I think she lied right along with her husband. and both of them were enriched in the process. She who conceived them should have been embarrassed and ashamed for this mistaken judgment. Listen to the word of Yahweh, children of Israel. Listen to the word of Yahweh, children of Israel. Shama, Dabar, Yahweh, Bnei Yisrael. Surely, with regard to Yahweh, there is a contentious conflict which needs to be resolved through rational discourse, especially concerning living in the land. This is because there is absolutely no honesty, nor integrity, no trustworthiness, no reliability. There is no sense of devotion, desire, nor duty. When it comes to God, there is a complete lack of understanding throughout the land. Once again, we see these words reflect Abraham's attitude and approach. There are oaths uttered which are spiritually harmful because swearing things which are not true about God has become commonplace, counterproductive and contrary to the truth. Oh, boy, is that ever true in Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, and socialist secular humanism. Cringeworthy lies and debilitating deceptions. In fact, today, the truth is indefensible. The truth will get you sequestered on social media. The truth will have a fact checker who is a devotee of socialist secular humanism squash anything that isn't consistent with their belief system. There is killing along with thievery. Then there is disloyalty in the relationship where they breach the agreement in destructive, divisive, and damning ways. Bloodshed becomes a violent plague of bloodletting. Boy, has that been true for the Jewish people. So how is it not a single individual has chosen to oppose this? Who has been determined to contentiously contend against it? And there is none who chooses to dispute their claims by arguing against them, rebuking them. Not a single individual. For your people are as contentious and as insulting as the priests. Therefore, you have stumbled and fallen this day. And the one who claims to speak for God has also faltered and stumbled with you during this darkness. So therefore, I will make a parable of your destructive attempt to be like your mother. My people are infected and silenced in this way, serving as a metaphor for self-inflicted destruction, perishing because of what they have done to themselves as a result of a lack of knowledge and corrupted information. Indeed, because you have avoided and rejected this knowledge which leads to understanding, I will also avoid and reject you from approaching me or serving as priests. And since you have overlooked and forgotten the Torah guidance of your God, I will overlook and cease to care about your children also. So then, as rabbis become more numerous and influential, they accordingly become increasingly wrong, missing the way to me. Their manifestation of power and authority I will change into dishonor and ignominy. Choose to start walking, because we should choose of our own volition to return to Yahweh. For indeed, he once picked us. Then he sent us away for a while so that he could heal and restore us over time. Yes, he chose to disable us, and yet he will wrap himself around us and bandage us. After 2 days, he will choose to revive us, restoring our lives, So within the third day, he will take a stand to reestablish us, and we shall live in his presence upon his appearance.
Here, here. Hey, hey.
Powerful, plain, clear, cerebral and emotional, tangible, practical, historically accurate, prophetically important.
Well,
I think that should be plastered on every synagogue in the world. But I'm not sure that would be the right place, because we're not trying to reach religious Jews.
No.
Put
it in all the delis.
But we put it in the delis so we can reach secular Jews. Yeah, we could do that,
like
couldn't we?
Delis.
Yeah.
I'll go start doing that. That'll be my job. I'll post it in all the delis. I love the delis.
Yeah, there we go.
Oh, Sarah was she was complicit in putting him together with her maid, her servant girl, the Egyptian girl, to make Ishmael. So
yes, she was.
So that's a clue. So I think you'll probably find that she was.
Yeah, I think she was. I'm not certain she was with Pharaoh initially, but she never told Pharaoh.
Saw the value in it later?
Never told Pharaoh. Because Pharaoh comes to Abraham and says, "What have you done to me? Why didn't you tell the truth? If you just said, she is my wife, I wouldn't have done this. And now Yahweh's plaguing me. God, your God is, he did not take kindly to this. And it's your fault." But Amalek, ooh, wow, he is. Sarah lied to me. You lied to me. What right did you have to put me and my people in this position? Oh, and by the way, here's a bunch of silver, here's a bunch of gold, and here's a bunch of sheep and cattle. Now, you go away.
Yeah. Wow.
Yep. That's how he became rich.
Christian became rich because he was so faithful.
Oh, yeah, because he was a scallywag. That's how he became rich, all right.
That's not good. Oh, wow. What insight.
Anyway, it's an interesting study, and I've gone from being disappointed for God and angry at him to say, wait a minute, there is so much material here, and it's so detailed, and it's so critical, and it's so immoral. God is trying to communicate something to us, and we ought to pick it up. And the message is really clear. Abraham is Yisrael.
Yisrael.
Yep.
Wow.
And so he is explaining exactly how Yisrael would act. And he is also saying, but I took this bum and I made him right. And if I can make this bum right, I can make the remnant of Yisrael right. And it's the same story. If I can communicate my name and my teaching through a mumbler, then we all ought to be engaged. Sure. If it's go through it all, and that's Yahweh's approach, and we ought to celebrate it. Well, I think everyone is going to enjoy it as we go there, and we're going to move through some material too that's going to be very, very critical of Adam, but even more critical of Towrah. And I've already had some of the proofreaders push back and say, "Oh my God, that's biting. Why pound away at this?" But
because it's there.
The word, it's just there.
That's what he said.
And I am either incapable of or am called for another purpose, but I just can't say, well, here's the translation. You figure it out. No, it's just, here's what the words say.
what does this mean? What are the options here? How do we interpret this? Was this okay? You know, if you name your firstborn son a waste of breath, is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Pretty easy.
You know? If you're misquoting God and blaming it on somebody else, is that a good thing or a bad thing?
No, you can take it. You have to take your own responsibility for those.
Right. So,
yeah.
Come on, yeah, it is bad, but it's real. I mean, that's one of the things that is just so interesting about the Torah and prophets. It's real.
You ain't kidding.
And there's so much to learn, and you know, as I say, the purpose of the Torah is to perfect the imperfect. That's why there's two conjugations in Hebrew, where it's all there to perfect the imperfect. And so we will return to this place next week. We've got really some interesting statements. In fact, where we're going really is one of my favorite places of all, Yirmiyah 31, and that's where we're going to begin next week. So my guess is that even though that's brief, it's only 4 or 5 statements. There's so much meat there. There's so many insights that we can glean from it that it's we'll take our time as we go through it.
Well, unlike golf, this is a great walk that's not spoiled.
Yeah, a great walk. Great. Yes. All right, my friend. We will we'll talk next week. Thank goodness we have a mulligan here and there, and
yeah, absolutely.
Yes. What is they say that golf is a game where the ball lies poorly but the player well.
Sure.
Yeah.
Make sure you're taking a race.
One of my favorites, of course, with golf is it's an ineffectual attempt to direct an uncontrollable sphere to an inaccessible target with implements ill-designed for the purpose.
Ill-designed for the process, yeah. That's right.
Yeah, that's the definition of
that's my game.
Of golf. Yeah, and we always need to remember what Yogi told us, that over 90% of putts that come up short don't go in.
Yeah, well done, Yogi. Oh gosh, did he really? So,
well, with those thoughts, as a hooker to a slicer, we wish you good night and may Yah bless.
Good night. Shalom, shalom.